Welcome to the last video in the School Garden series. My name is Danielle Anderson. I'm a food systems dietitian and education consultant and a certified school garden educator. Each video in this series is intended to provide a foundation for garden programming and give you the best shot at creating a fruitful, functional garden space. In the first part of the series, we focused on the many reasons to garden. In the second video, we talked about the types of things to consider before breaking ground. And in the third video, we provided some guidance around growing zones, seasons, and planting calendars with a focus on Maricopa County. In this last video of the series, part 4, we'll provide general planting techniques and best practices for maintaining a functional garden. In this last presentation, we will look at garden options, prepping beds and soil, deciding between seeds and transplants, or a combination of both, and we will highlight what plants need when it comes to space and watering. This quote from Little Seeds Grow Mighty Trees not only speaks to physical growth, but is wonderfully symbolic for what we hope students in the community can take away from their garden experiences. And another quote from the second video, There Are No Garden Mistakes, Only Experiments by Janet Phillips, emphasizes what should always remain in the background when it comes to garden work. Gardens will likely encounter obstacles to their growth. We may not see the production levels we initially hoped for, and that is okay, as the learning is embedded in our efforts and it is the experiences our participants will ultimately take with them. Let's begin with some common garden options. Raised beds are probably the most common among schools and community gardens. They rest directly on the ground and they raise the soil level up a desired amount. A nice feature of this type of garden is that the bed space is clearly defined and it is easy to create designated pathways all around the beds for maintenance and activities. Plus, it's easy to add in pest and weed barriers to raised beds before adding soil. Cement blocks and wood are the most often used materials, but wood does not last as long as the cement. And this is especially true with untreated wood, but that is also the best option if the garden bed is growing vegetables to be consumed. In-ground beds are great options if there is access to quality native soil. But do keep in mind that pests can be an issue with in-ground beds. Container gardening uses enclosed pots that offer opportunities for movement. Containers are a great option for anyone new to gardening as they are an easy, low-budget way to experiment with gardening. Some cons are that the containers can dry out fast and fertilizer needs to be considered with this option. Also, regular garden soil may be too heavy for container use, meaning it won't drain properly. Potting mixes include soil and other materials like perlite and vermiculite that help with aeration and drainage. Trough-style beds are kind of a combination between raised beds and containers depending on their size. These can be a nice option when wheels are attached to make for easily movable beds to ensure quality sun exposure and general use if there is not a designated garden area. Whether or not the trough includes a bottom is what basically determines if it is a raised bed or a container, which then points to the associated characteristics and considerations of the type. Vertical hanging gardens are not as common as the others on this list, but they are worth mentioning as they can complement other garden bed options. They can help with sound reduction in an outdoor learning space. Growth can occur within limited space. Maintenance and water can be minimal. The setup offers disease and pest protection as it lives up off the ground, and it can be a good option for pollinator plants and herbs. Choosing the best plants for vertical is not much different than other beds. It's important to consider sun and shade and which plant may grow best, those that are hanging down like herbs, tomatoes, beans, and those that don't need deep soil like lettuces and other greens are great options. The sun in Maricopa County especially is intense, as we all know, and close proximity to cement walls can reflect that heat onto the garden, drying out many plants, so do keep that in mind if you choose vertical gardening. For each of these gardens, though, it is essential to think through when choosing the type and placement. When we think of school and community gardens, often thoughts go to the common types from the last slide. However, there are other garden options, some that can be homemade from easy access materials, even used as a class project or community lesson. And some systems like the tower style gardens have been awarded to schools via grants. Not every garden must grow in a bed. These gardens allow for growth that does not depend on season, and some can be moved around class to class or indoors to outdoors. So aeroponics on the top right is a system in which the roots of the plants are suspended for the entire life cycle of the plant, allowing for continuous air circulation. Watering takes place on a cycle and it cascades down from the top of the garden to the bottom, recycling the water and ultimately requiring less water. Liquid nutrients are added to this system to replace those typically provided by soil. Hydroponics in the bottom picture is a system where the plant's roots are completely submerged in water for its entire life cycle. Liquid nutrients are also added to this system. Aquaponics is a garden system that combines hydroponics and fish farming. The fish water is made nutrient-rich by the waste from the fish and is then circulated into the hydroponic garden. So let's look at what it means to prep a garden bed, and in this slide we're going to specifically be talking about a brand new garden site. So before planting a school or community garden to grow food, it can be important to conduct a soil test. This soil test can let you know what you may need to add or to adjust the soil's pH for ideal plant growth and or to correct any nutrient deficiencies. Plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK, to grow. Nitrogen is a key element in plant growth. It is found in all plant cells. Phosphorus helps transfer energy from sunlight to plants and also stimulates early root and plant growth. And potassium increases plant strength and disease resistance, and it helps form plant starches, sugars, and oils in plants, improving their overall quality. Contaminants should also be considered as well. Lead is the most common concern, but other heavy metals or pollutants may also be a problem depending on location. Because lead is not biodegradable, once it's in the soil, it remains a long-term source of contamination, and this is often a problem in our more urban areas. Now let's talk about cultivating the soil, which basically means digging in. If it's a new site, the soil will need to be tilled, broken up, and stirred. This may require weed and other plant removal, and or mixing in organic material to return nutrients to the soil or to raise or lower the pH. Tilling is not necessarily a requirement in each subsequent season, but it should be done in advance of the first season a few weeks before. Lastly, with a new raised bed garden, soil will need to be added. And although we mentioned tilling, removing any Bermuda grass and creating a perimeter weed barrier is so important. Bermuda grass is a bane in the existence of many a school and community garden down here, continually showing up season after season. Not only is removal essential, it is suggested to create a very wide perimeter around any garden area and further protect the beds with a weed pest barrier prior to adding in the new soil. Now, this may be the moment where you are wondering how to know exactly how much soil to purchase and add to your garden. There are formulas that participants can do to figure this out as a lesson or an activity, and there are also online calculators like this one from Home Depot. So really quickly to run through some of the steps, the first thing you do is you click into the type and choose topsoil using the pull-down menu. Then I like to choose the 1 cubic feet of bag size, makes for easy calculations, and then purchases later. And then you want to add in the length, width, and depth of your garden bed, garden space, or container. And then lastly, you just simply click the calculate button and it will provide you with the amount of bags or bulk soil needed for your garden. Keep in mind that your garden bed should have some space left at the top without soil spilling over before the plants are added. Now, a new season in the same location requires some different types of preparation. Once your garden is established, it is not necessary to till or turn over the soil each new season. And stirring up the soil can actually be detrimental as it disrupts the ecosystem of beneficial microorganisms and overall can harm the soil structure. So step 1 instead is to clear the beds. And this means removing plants, irrigation, basically everything on the bed surface, including easily pullable roots attached to plants. So some plants do return year to year, and so it's important to note when mapping out the garden so that participants know which plants to leave in. Step Step 2 is to check the soil moisture and aerate the soil. Hand testing looks like squeezing soil to see if any water comes out. If it does, then the soil is a little too wet and not ready for planting. You can also try to make a ball with the soil, and again, if there's no dripping, then it's ready to go. And then, similar to baking, you can stick the end of a tool in, and if no big clumps of soil stick to that tool, it's ready for planting. Aerating is not turning the soil over like tilling is. Instead, it's stabbing down into the soil to allow for airflow. Step 3 is to add compost and/or a soil topper. Sometimes a lot of soil is lost between seasons, especially after heavy rain seasons. It is important to have sufficient soil levels for planting. Organic matter and fertilizers should also be added to reach those levels of NPK that are needed for growth, as discussed in slide 5. Now let's look at choosing between seeds or transplant planting methods. Some plants are going to prefer direct seeding and others are going to do better as transplants. So direct seeding methods can easily be done by hand with larger seeds placed individually into predetermined spaces, and smaller seeds can also be sprinkled or scattered with a sand mixture. Seeding often requires additional attention to ensure each plant has enough room to grow. Thinning or removing extra weaker plants when they are a few inches tall should give each remaining plant adequate space to mature. Planting from seed can also face obstacles as the environment can't be controlled for optimum growth and it requires more time to grow. Determining how much time is needed for planting from seed or transplant was covered in the third video of this series. Now, using transplants, either store-bought or grown as seedlings indoors, can offer more predictability and a quicker start to the season once planted outdoors. This is especially helpful if planting using the seeding method won't have enough time to reach full maturity, or if the goal is to plant the same type of plants in phases to reach a desired harvest. Transplanting might also be considered if pests are a problem, as tiny seedlings recently sprouted from seed can be quite attractive. And water use for transplants is not as high as with the seeding method. But planting transplants have their cons too. If growing transplants, their environment should be ideal, like a greenhouse or other indoor location to get them started with light and water. Purchasing baby plants are much more costly compared to seed purchases. And transplant shock must be considered as it's important to harden off the plants before transplanting them into the outdoor garden space. Let's look at seeding. Direct seeding refers to planting seeds directly into the soil instead of raising seedlings for later transplanting. Each of these methods can easily be accomplished by hand. First, there's the furrow method, planting on a long, narrow trench, and you can see that in the bottom right. You can use a trowel to create a shallow line or furrow. Sections can be created for participants using sticks to create barriers or borders. And then you later cover the trench with soil. The second one is broadcasting, and the broadcasting method works well with flower seeds, lettuce mixes, cover crops, grains. Basically what you do is you toss or sprinkle over the area you want, and then you cover again lightly with soil. Larger seeds can be used with a rake to toss into the soil. Lastly, drilling is laying seeds out in appropriate spacing with regular intervals in the rows. This is an easy method to invite participants to then poke them into the ground. And so you're laying out a pre-marked string supporting appropriate seed placement. And you can kind of see that in the bottom left picture where you're just using like one by one. So while some plants prefer seeding methods, using transplants can buy time if there isn't a ton of season time remaining. When transplanting, the goal is for the soil ball to be level with the soil level in the garden, taking care to help prop up skinny stems by lightly pushing soil toward the seedling. Earlier, I mentioned how transplant shock must be considered, and this is where it becomes important to harden off the baby plants before transplanting them into the outdoor garden space. Hardening off just means that the plant must get used to the outdoors, the light, and the temperature before planting. This toughens them up to the elements and improves their rate of success. They should be given approximately 1 week of hardening off before planting, with each new day exposed to more time outside until full sun and evening temps can be experienced. Here are some general planting tips. Step 1. If you can wait, choose a cool, overcast day for planting. This can be pretty difficult to do here in Maricopa County, so another ideal time is to plant early in the morning before the sun is too hot or later in the afternoon. 2, make sure your plants are well watered before planting. Plants should be hydrated, but you don't want the soil dripping wet. 3, have your spots in your soil pre-dug. This will minimize the time the roots are exposed to drying air. 4, handle your plants with care, turning the pot upside down into your hand while holding the stem of the plant between your fingers. The plant's root ball should slip out easily, but if it doesn't, the edge of the pot you can hit against a solid surface as you're holding it upside down, and this should dislodge that root ball. Step 5, plant your plant at a correct depth. Place the plant in the planting hole so that the top of the root ball is even with the soil surface, and then gently firm the soil around the root ball. Step 6, water your newly set out plants gently but thoroughly. Take care not to disturb the soil, but also reach the entire root ball. And then step 7, it may be helpful to give young plants some temporary shelter from sun and wind while the plants get established. Planting depth and spacing are very important for any kind of plant, whether planted by seed or transplant. Most seed packets and transplant tags indicate exactly what the plant needs, but if they don't, here are just a few guides. In regards to plant depth, it's important for a good strong root system. If planting using a seeding method, dig as deep as you dig wide. You can use your finger to guide and dig only down to the first or second knuckle. And as a general suggestion, don't go too deep. This is a common mistake that is made. If planting by transplant, dig the planting hole as deep as the root ball of the plant and make sure the soil level is even so that it will be growing at the same depth in its new location. In regards to plant spacing, some plants require a lot of space around each plant to grow. Giving plants their needed space limits competition for sunlight and other nutrients and can potentially protect them from other diseased plants. On the other side of this idea, if plants are too far apart, there is greater opportunity for weeds to grow. If your seed packet doesn't tell you how far apart to plant, a little online research about the type of plant will give you your answer. Once you know how far apart, rulers or seedling strings with designated knots can help guide participants. And there are a bunch of other methods to use as lessons when planting with accurate spacing. But also, please remember, planting does not have to be perfect. Most people understand that watering is essential for keeping a plant hydrated, but many don't know that water also carries the nutrients. There are so many different ways to setting up irrigation and regular watering systems for gardens, but it's important to keep in mind that anything exposed to the sun in the Phoenix Valley will likely degrade with time and need to be replaced. Minimizing contact with sunlight can be a battle for tubing, connectors, and hoses. DripWorks is noted on the companion resource sheet and is worth checking out for research to give ideas of how to set up garden irrigation, ideally before beds are in place. But again, keep in mind that desert gardening can look different from other areas in the country. For desert growing, the best watering method is one that provides a slow, deep soak for the soil. This can be achieved by soaker hoses, drip hoses, watering between raised rows, and in some cases flooding, although this method can be quite a contentious option here in the Phoenix Valley. Water the soil, not the plants. Many plants will burn or develop signs of stress if the leaves are regularly made wet by a hose or other watering method. Water should soak deeply into the soil, which flushes away the salts and encourages deep root growth. It is time to water when the top 2 inches of soil are dry. Ideally, water should soak a full 12 inches into the soil or to the bottom of your raised bed garden if it's less than a foot deep. This can be measured by using a soil probe. You will only be able to push the soil probe into the soil as deeply as the water has traveled. Before planting for the first time, water deeply and let the garden bed rest before planting. Do not dig or till wet soil. Doing so may permanently damage the soil. As mentioned earlier, if the soil forms a ball when you roll it in your hands, or if the soil sticks to your shovel when you dig, wait till it dries out a little more before you work it in. Hopefully this series provided a foundation for school and community garden programming. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. As a reminder, all resources are either linked below in the description or on the companion blog post, depending on how you are accessing this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.